The gray sky lay low and heavy over Winterfell, the sun a distant coin behind the mist, its warmth little more than a memory. The morning wind brought with it the scents of wood smoke and earth, of wolves and old stone, and Arya Stark drank it all in as she stood atop the battlements. She was 16, lean from training but no longer boyishly thin, her dark hair unbound and tumbling down her back in wild waves. She wore a mantle of deep gray wool, the direwolf of House Stark stitched across her shoulders, and beneath it, the weight of a new life settled itself against her bones. Down below in the courtyard, the men of Winterfell drilled with pikes, their boots stomping rhythmically on the hard-packed earth. Horses snorted in the stables. Hullen barked orders at stable boys. Septa Mordain shepherded a pair of noble girls toward the sept, her sharp voice cutting through the air. Everything was as it had been, and yet, nothing was as it was before. Arya's gloved hands gripped the cold stone of the parapet. She was no assassin, no faceless shadow among strangers. She was Arya of House Stark, Lady of Winterfell. The words tasted strange on her tongue still, though she had said them often enough now. To bannermen, to small folk, to the graybeards who still remembered Eddard Stark and looked for his daughter's metal in her eyes. They had found it, or so she hoped. She watched the yard below. Sansa's boy, little Rickon, played near the heart tree with his nurse, chasing after a pup with a thick white tail. Bran, now grown into a man's height but always fragile, moved with a limp toward the maester's turret, a sheaf of letters tucked beneath his arm. Arya's gaze followed him, fond and protective. She heard footsteps, the measured tread of someone who belonged here, and did not turn as Jon Snow joined her on the battlements. He wore a black cloak despite the spring chill, his sword ghost at his hip, though the direwolf for which it was named slumbered in the godswood. "You're up early," Jon said. His voice had deepened since the wall, a gravel to it that spoke of years beyond his age. "So are you," Arya replied, offering him the barest smile. "Couldn't sleep?" Jon leaned on the parapet beside her, arms folded. He looked out over the walls, the wilds beyond Winterfell's safety, the place where the snows melted into bog and pine. "It's different, isn't it? After everything. It's home." Arya's voice was quiet, but unyielding. "It's ours, Jon." He turned to study her face. "You never told me why." Arya knew what he meant. Why she had chosen to stay, to become Lady of Winterfell, when every story ever told of her was of a wild girl chasing cats and climbing towers, of a wolf who ran with the pack, but never at its head. She looked away, toward the rising sun, the world bathed in silver. "I didn't want to be what they wanted," Arya said at last. "But I didn't want to be no one either. Sansa is queen in the south now. Bran is lost to his dreams and his ravens. Father's gone, mother too. Someone had to be here, Jon." Jon touched her hand, a rare gesture of warmth from the brother who understood her best. "You're not alone." "I know." Arya's smile, fleeting and fierce, was for him alone. A horn blew in the yard, summoning the household for the morning meal. Arya straightened her shoulders, feeling the weight of her duties settling around her like the cloak of her house. "Will you come?" she asked. "I'll be there," Jon promised. Arya descended the steps to the great hall, her feet echoing in the stairwell. The banners of House Stark, newly cleaned and mended, hung from the rafters, their dear wolves proud and defiant. The servants bowed as she entered. Old Nan, still alive and stubborn, hobbled past with a tray of bread. Arya greeted them all with a nod, not as their lady, but as one of their own. At the high table, she took her place in the center, the seat that had once belonged to her father. To her right sat Bran, silent and thoughtful, his eyes distant as if he saw beyond the stone and snow. To her left, Maester Wolkan, quill in hand, ready to note her words and commands. The hall filled with people, knights and small folk, the remnants of loyal houses, Manderley, Glover, Tallheart, who had survived the wars and chosen to bend the knee once more. Arya broke her bread, sipped her watered ale, and listened to the petitions of her people. A quarrel over sheep, a marriage contract to be witnessed, a question of justice for a poacher caught in the woods. She answered them with the bluntness that had become her hallmark, tempered by the hard-won patience of someone who had learned the price of hasty justice. She listened to Maester Walken's reports of grain stores, to Bran's soft-spoken advice, to the grumbling of Lord Glover about taxes. She was not her mother, nor her sister, nor her father, but she was enough. The North knew her now, and she had become theirs. Later, in the solar, Arya bent over the ledgers by candlelight. The work was tedious, the numbers blurring before her eyes, but she refused to yield. Jon sat across from her, a sheaf of reports from the wall in his hand. "You're better at this than you think," Jon said. Arya grimaced. "Better than a blind girl, maybe. Worse than Sansa." "You're not Sansa." "No, I'm not." She put down her quill and stared at the map of the North spread across the table. "Do you remember the stories old Nan used to tell? About the last long night?" "Then?" Jon smiled, the lines in his face softening. "I remember. You always wanted to fight the others with your wooden sword." Arya grinned, a flash of the girl she had been. "I still do, sometimes. But now I have to fight with numbers and words and the patience of a saint. I think I'd rather have a sword." Jon's eyes grew serious. "We need you here, Arya. The North needs you." She nodded. She did not say that she sometimes woke in the night, dreaming of far places. The free cities, the dark alleys of Bravos, the endless green of the riverlands. She did not say that sometimes, when the wind howled and the snows pressed close against the windows, she missed the silence of the faceless men, the comfort of anonymity. But she also remembered the look in her sister's eyes as Sansa left for the south, the trust Bran placed in her each time he turned away from the cares of the realm, the hope Jon wore like a banner in the dark. She remembered her father's smile, the smell of the godswood, the warmth of home. Those were the things that mattered. Winterfell was not easy, nor safe, nor peaceful. There were threats from the south, Queen Cersei's vengeful reach, rumors of new kings rising in the Riverlands, the uneasy peace that followed the war. There were wildlings to the north, still skittish after the Night King's fall. But Arya faced each new day with the tenacity that had carried her through the worst of times. In the Godswood, beneath the Heart Tree, Arya knelt in the snow. The red leaves whispered above her, and for a moment, she let herself be still. She spoke the old prayers, the ones her father had taught her, and when she rose, her face was calm. She found Rickon, now a sturdy boy of 8, swinging a wooden sword against a post. "Let me see your grip," Arya said, taking the sword from his hand. She adjusted his fingers, straightened his stance, and smiled as he struck again. Harder and truer. "Will I be a knight, Arya?" Rickon asked, his cheeks flushed. "You'll be whatever you want to be," Arya said. "But you'll always be a wolf." He grinned, the fierce Stark grin, and Arya ruffled his hair. For a moment she saw her own childhood in his eyes, the dreams of running wild and free. But she saw something else too, the strength of a pack, the promise of home. That night, as the wind howled and snow beat against the glass, Arya sat by the fire in her solar, needlework in her lap. The stitches were clumsy, but she persisted. She was not her mother, nor her sister, but she was learning. A knock at the door, and Jon entered, a letter in hand. He tossed it onto the table. The seal was broken, the wax smeared. "Word from the south," Jon said. "Sansa writes. She asks after you." Arya's heart twisted. She read the letter. Sansa's neat hand, familiar and strange. The Queen of the South, writing to her sister, the Lady of Winterfell. "She worries for you," Jon said quietly. "She misses you." "I miss her too." Arya folded the letter, tucking it close to her heart. They sat in silence, the fire crackling between them. Outside, the wolves howled in the night. Days passed. The seasons turned, slow and inexorable. Arya ruled with a steady hand, her name spoken with respect, and not a little fear. She rode out with her bannermen to settle disputes, walked among the small folk in the market square, trained the younger boys in swordplay, and visited the old women in the kitchens. She was everywhere and nowhere, a shadow and a light. In the great hall, she held court. Lords and ladies came to her with their grievances, their hopes, their fears. Arya listened to them all, weighing their words, judging with the fairness her father had taught her, and the shrewdness she had learned in far lands. When a merchant's daughter was found murdered in the woods, Arya rode out herself, tracking the killer through snow and bramble, her eyes sharp and unyielding. When a blight threatened the barley fields, she convened her council, demanding answers and solutions. When a knight insulted her honor at a feast, she challenged him to a duel and beat him soundly, to the cheers of her bannermen. Yet not all battles could be won with sword and wit. The North was hungry, the scars of war slow to heal. Winterfell's walls needed mending, its people hope. Arya worked tirelessly, rising before dawn and sleeping long after the fires burned low. She wrote letters to old friends and new allies, seeking grain, silver, skilled hands. She opened the gates to the poor, took in orphans, rebuilt the burned villages with her own hands when need be. And in all things, she remembered who she was, Arya Stark. Not a ghost, not a shadow, not no one. One evening, as she walked the walls, Jon joined her once more. They watched the stars emerge, bright and cold. "Do you regret it?" Jon asked. Arya did not answer at once. She looked out over the lands she had sworn to protect, the home she had rebuilt from ruin. She thought of the faces she had worn, the lives she had taken, the girl she had been. "No," she said at last. "Not anymore." Jon nodded. "You saved us all, Arya." She smiled, fierce and true. "No, I saved myself, and I saved Winterfell." He grinned. "That's enough." She looked up at the stars, the north spread out beneath her, and felt, for the first time, the weight of home settle not as a burden, but as a comfort. She was Lady of Winterfell. She was a Stark of the North. She was herself, and that was enough. The days rolled on, filled with new challenges, new joys. Arya watched Rickon grow into a strong young man, wise beyond his years. She guided Bran as he drifted between worlds, her hand always ready to anchor him. She wrote to Sansa often, their letters a lifeline between North and South. She listened to the people of Winterfell, their needs, their hopes, their fears, and met them with courage and grace. At night, when the castle was quiet, Arya would slip away to the Godswood, needle in hand. She would practice her forms beneath the heart tree, the old words on her lips, her body moving through the shadows like a wolf at home. And always, she remembered, the pack survives. Winter came, and with it, darkness and snow, hunger and fear. But Winterfell stood strong, its walls unbroken, its people united. Arya led them through the storm, her heart fierce and unyielding. She was no longer a little girl chasing dreams. She was the Lady of Winterfell, and she would never run from her duty again. The North remembered, and so did she. K-Pen. The wind keened around the towers of Winterfell, rattling the frost-clad banners until their threads snapped in the night. When dawn finally pried the darkness from the castle, it revealed a world buried beneath fresh snow. Each roof bowed under the weight, each field lost to a blank white hush. From her chamber window, Arya watched Winterfell wake. Chimneys belched smoke into the freezing air. The smith's forge kindled its first sullen embers, and in the yard below, a cluster of men hauled wood to the great hall. She did not linger by the warmth. Duty demanded she descend, and so she did, boots crunching across the yard as she moved briskly toward the kitchens. Her presence there was no longer cause for whispers or surprise. She listened as Gage recited the state of their stores. How much salt pork remained, how many casks of turnips were left unspoiled, the dwindling jars of honey. Arya took note, asked after the new kitchen girl's health, and promised to speak to the maester about more healing herbs. From the kitchens, She crossed to the great hall, where the small council gathered each morning at her command. Bran sat beside her chair, not quite lord and not quite wizard. His gaze somewhere far away. Maester Walken's hands shook as he laid out the daily reports. Elise Karstark, the sharp-eyed steward Arya trusted most, arrived with news from the outer villages. Black Brock lost another herd to wolves last night. Elise said, voice low. Not ours. Real wolves. Arya nodded, mind leaping to practicalities. Double the guard patrols near Black Brock. Make sure the children stay indoors after dusk. Elise hesitated, lips thin. That's not all. There's talk of raiders along the White Knife. Fugitives from the south, perhaps. 2 hamlets burned. One survivor said the men carried Lannister banners, though I find that hard to believe. And Arya's jaw tightened. Send riders to the nearest villages. Offer shelter within our walls to any who fear for their lives. If these men are truly Lannisters, I want proof. If not, I want their heads. She felt Bran's eyes on her, cool and searching. Sometimes, he said, voice distant, people fly other banners to mask their own sins. Arya did not look at him. Sometimes they do. She dismissed the council, left Elise to dispatch the riders and retreated to her solar, but the quiet would not last. Hardly had she sat to review the accounts when a knock sounded. Jon entered, snow still clinging to his hair and beard. He looked tired, older than his years, the ghosts of the wall still walking beside him. They found tracks in the woods, he said without preamble. South of the Shivering Wood. Men, 6, maybe more. 2 horses shod like Southron war horses. No sigil left behind. Arya set aside her ledger. How close to the holdfast? Too close. She stood. I'll ride out myself. Jon frowned. It's not safe. I am not a child, Jon. His eyes darkened. I know, but you are Lady of Winterfell. If you die, I won't die. Arya cut him off. And if I do, then Winterfell will stand, because I taught Rickon and allies and every soul in this castle to fight like wolves. Jon hesitated, but in the end he only nodded. I'm coming with you. By noon, Arya was already in the saddle, bundled against the cold. Jon rode beside her, 24 guards at their heels. The forest closed around them, bare branches laced with ice, crows flitting from bough to bough. Arya led by instinct, letting the hush and the sharp tang of sap guide her. Here. She felt alive. Each step forward a return to the wildness of her youth, the days she'd spent hunting with Nymeria and climbing the walls like a shadow. It was not long before they found the tracks. Broken brush, the deep cleft of hooves, a torn length of crimson cloth snagged on a bramble. Jon dismounted first, inspecting the ground. 6 men, you said? Arya asked. Looks like it. Moving fast, but not careful. Lenderu. Arya knelt, touching the snow. She caught the faintest trace of oil and leather. A memory. A warning. They're desperate. She motioned for her men to fan out. The forest, though quiet, thrummed with danger. Hours passed as they tracked, the light dying behind heavy clouds. At last they found the camp. A ring of stones, still warm, and scattered bones picked clean. Jon's voice was low. Whoever they were, they're gone now. Arya stared at the remains, her gut twisting. Or close enough to see us coming. She scanned the trees. Her old instincts, honed in Bravos and sharpened in the alleys of strange cities, rose within her. She sensed eyes upon them, though she saw nothing. We should return, Jon said. But Arya shook her head. No, we wait. The wolves came first. Real wolves, gray and silent. They circled at the edge of the clearing. Hackles raised. Arya stood, not afraid. One approached, yellow-eyed and wary. She met its gaze, and for a heartbeat, the world shrank to only that silent communion. A memory of Nymeria stirred in her chest. The wolf turned, vanishing into the trees. The message was clear. Danger, and soon. Jon's hand went to his sword, and Arya's men tightened their ranks. Moments later, the raiders burst from the shadows, ragged, hungry, desperate, but armed with steel. There were 7, not 6, and the first one carried a Lannister sword, though he wore no sigil. Arya drew needle, her movements quick and precise. The first man lunged, and Arya dodged, driving the point into his thigh. He fell with a scream, and the next was upon her. She parried, felt the shock travel up her arm, then twisted, fainted low, and knocked him senseless with the pommel. Jon was beside her, longclaw flashing. 2 of the guards fell, crimson staining the snow. Arya fought with a savage joy she had not known in years. The dance of death, the rhythm of sword and breath and blood. But she was not alone now, and she remembered that with each step, she fought not for herself, but for Winterfell. When it ended, 4 men lay dead. The rest fled into the woods. Jon knelt by the dying, seeking answers, but Arya found what she needed in the spoils. The sword was Lannister, but the clothing beneath the blood was Riverland's homespun. Bandits then, using fear to mask their hunger. She spat into the snow. The South won't save us. We save ourselves. They burned the bodies, left warnings at the edge of the villages, and returned to Winterfell in silence. That night, Arya sat by the fire, needle across her knees, her hands shaking from the fight. She was not a girl anymore, nor a faceless killer. She was a wolf, fierce, wounded, unwilling to yield. Bran entered the solar, silent as a shadow. He lowered himself into the chair opposite her, the firelight dancing in his eyes. "You could have died," he said. "So could you. So could anyone." Bran studied her, the weight of centuries in his gaze. "You are not meant to be a ghost, Arya. You are meant to be seen, to be followed." Arya looked away. "Sometimes I wish I could vanish, run off to sea, chase dreams that aren't mine to have." Bran was quiet for a long time. "You chose to stay." "I did. But it's hard. Everything worth doing is." She managed to smile. "Do you see the future, Bran? Or just the past?" "Both. Neither. I see possibilities. And I see that if you left, Winterfell would fall apart." Arya snorted. "You always know just what to say to ruin a good salt." Bran smiled, the barest flicker of warmth. "Go to sleep, Arya. The North needs you awake." The months slid by. Arya fell into the rhythm of rule. Council meetings, disputes among bannermen, decisions about food and timber, and justice. She found comfort in her people, in the stubborn, loyal, hard-edged men and women of the North. She made mistakes and owned them. She listened and learned. In the spring, a delegation came from White Harbor. Lord Wyman Manderly's son, a boy of 20, sought Arya's hand in marriage. She met him in the Godswood, where the Weir Wood's red eyes watched over all. He bowed low. "Lady Arya, it would honor me." She stopped him with a raised hand. "You want Winterfell, I understand. But Winterfell is not won by marriage. It is won by loyalty, by blood, by hardship. I will not wed for politics." The young Manderly flushed. "My father said, 'Your father's a good man, but he's not a wolf.' Tell him this. If he stands by Winterfell, Winterfell stands by him. If not, well, the sea is cold." He left, chastened. Arya watched him go, then knelt before the heart tree, breathing in the scent of earth and sap. She thought of Gendry, of the few moments they'd shared before war and duty drove them apart. She missed him, but she did not regret her choices. Later that week, Arya gathered her council. No more marriage proposals. She declared, "I will not have my worth measured by whose bed I share." Some of the old lords grumbled, but Alys Karstark only smiled. "You've got teeth, Arya Stark." Arya bared them in return. So does every wolf. Summer brought change to the north. The snows melted, rivers swelled, and the forests grew thick and green. Winterfell thrived. Fields replanted, walls mended, stores replenished. Arya rode often, visiting villages, settling disputes with a firm hand. The people came to know her as their own, not just a Stark, but a leader who saw and remembered them. One day, as Arya rode through the market square, she caught a thief, a ragged girl with quick hands, eyes full of defiance. Arya called her forward. "What is your name?" Arya asked. The girl spat. "Willow, Dar." Arya crouched beside her. "You're hungry. I understand. But if you steal, others go hungry too." Bah! Willow met her gaze, unafraid. "You were a wolf. I heard the old women say so." Arya smiled. "Still am. But wolves look after their own. You want food? Earn it. Help in the kitchens. Learn to read, to fight, to work." The girl nodded, eyes wide. Later, Arya watched as Willow scrubbed pots beside the cook. The cycle turned. Each small act built the pack. The North endured. Years passed. Rickon grew into a man, tall and broad, his sword arm strong. Bran retreated deeper into his mysteries, speaking less, but watching always. Sansa, queen in the south, visited when she could, her letters a comfort through long winters. One autumn, word came of unrest in the Riverlands. Bands of sellswords harried the roads, and rumors spread that a Targaryen pretender rallied support in the storm-lashed east. Arya called her bannermen, prepared her soldiers, and sent Jon south to parley with old allies. Before he left, Jon sought her in the Godswood. "Are you afraid?" he asked. Arya considered. "Yes. But fear is just another wolf to be tamed." He embraced her, fierce and brief. "Winterfell will stand. You'll see to it." "Dan?" She watched him ride away, Ghost at his side, and felt the ache of loss, but also pride. The pack was strong. The pack survived. Winter came again, as it always did. The snows returned. The winds howled. But this time, Winterfell stood ready. Arya walked the halls, her steps silent and sure. In the library, she read old histories and wrote new ones. In the yard, she trained young men and women, teaching them not only swordplay, but the strength to lead, to listen, to protect. Sometimes, in the deep hours of the night, Arya would slip from her chambers, needle in hand, and walk the walls alone. She would remember the faces of the dead, the friends lost, and the family found. She would think of Gendry's laughter, of Sansa's wisdom, of Jon's loyalty, and Bran's secrets. She would remember her father's voice, her mother's embrace, and the wild joy of running with Nymeria beneath the moon. But most of all, she remembered who she was, not a girl, not a ghost, not a killer, but a Stark of Winterfell, Lady of the North, leader of her people, keeper of the old ways and builder of the new. She was home, and she was never alone. The wolf blood ran deep in her veins, and it showed in her rule. Fierce, unyielding, but just. When word came that the king in the south sought to claim more taxes from the north, Arya rode to King's Landing herself, unafraid. The court gawked at her arrival. A northern lady clad in wolfskin, sword at her hip, eyes sharp as any lord's. Sansa met her at the gates, regal in her silks. But Arya saw the girl she'd once known behind the queen's mask. They talked long into the night, of duty and love, of sacrifice and hope. Sansa wept for the years lost, and Arya held her, promising that the pack was strong still, though scattered. Before the king, Arya spoke boldly. "The North remembers. We pay our debts, but we bow to no one. Winterfell stands because we endure. Do not mistake our patience for weakness." The king relented, cowed by the force of her will. Sansa smiled, proud, and the two sisters walked the halls of the Red Keep together, side by side. When Arya returned to Winterfell, it was with the knowledge that she had changed the world. Not through killing or running, but through staying, through leading, through loving, through enduring. The people cheered her return. Willow, now a grown woman, stood at the gates, her own daughter in her arms. Rickon rode at Arya's side, the banner of the wolf high above them. Winterfell was whole, and so was she. In the years that followed, Arya watched her people flourish. She married, not for politics but for love. A northern lord whose name mattered little, whose heart matched hers in fierceness and faith. Together, they raised children who ran the halls with laughter and light. Arya taught them all she knew: to fight, to lead, to protect those who could not protect themselves. She grew older, her hair streaked with silver, her gaze as sharp as ever. She watched as Rickon took a wife, as Bran slipped further into legend, as Sansa's rule in the south brought peace at last. Sometimes, Arya would walk alone into the wilds beyond Winterfell, just as she had as a girl. The wolves would find her, circling close, and she would run with them for a time, free beneath the open sky. But always, she returned home. When Arya's time at last drew to a close, the people of the north gathered to honor her. They told stories of the wild girl who became a lady, of the wolf who led them through darkness into light. They remembered her courage, her kindness, her fierce love. Her children and grandchildren knelt at her side, the pack unbroken. Arya Stark, Lady of Winterfell, closed her eyes for the last time beneath the heart tree, the red leaves whispering above her. The north remembered, and the world, changed by her hand, would never forget. Ah. The first snows of the new year came softly, so gently that Arya scarcely noticed their arrival until she woke one morning to find her window rimed with ice. The world beyond blurred into pale white. Even after decades at Winterfell, the hush of a snow-blanketed dawn could still startle her, returning her in memory to the girl she'd once been, wild, fearless, always searching for the next adventure. Now, she greeted the hush as an old companion, proof that she had endured, and that her home endured with her. In the quiet hours before dawn, Arya rose and wrapped herself in her thickest cloak. Her hair, long and streaked with silver now, she gathered at her nape in a simple braid, practicality winning over vanity as ever. Winter had settled in her bones, but it had not slowed her spirit. As she moved through the corridor, the stones remembered her footsteps. The servants she passed bowed with honest smiles, and in the kitchens, the early fires crackled a welcome. She took her tea from the hands of a girl who reminded her of Willow, all sharp elbows and shining eyes. Arya slipped from the castle into the pre-dawn stillness, her boots sinking into the new snow, the air biting and bright. She crossed the yard and entered the Godswood alone, leaving the walls and noise of Winterfell behind her. There, beneath the ancient heart tree, she knelt and pressed her palm to the frozen earth, feeling the pulse of her family through the roots below. She did not pray. Exactly. She was never one for the pretty words of the sept or the careful rituals of the maester. Instead, she simply listened. The wind rustled the red leaves overhead, whispering secrets in a tongue only the north remembered. In that hush, Arya found her peace. As dawn broke pink on the horizon, a crunch of snow behind her made Arya turn. Rickon approached, broad-shouldered and ruddy-faced, a thick brown beard framing his smile. He moved with the easy strength of a man who had been bred to Winterfell, and his laughter was warm even in the cold. "You're up early, Mother." Arya stood and brushed the snow from her cloak. "So are you, Lord Stark." He grinned. "Eh. The lords will be at my throat by midday, arguing over the mill rights again." "Let them," Arya said and squeezed his arm. "You're wise enough to hear them out, and stubborn enough not to give them all they want." Rickon's eyes softened. "I learned from the best." He fell into step beside her as they returned to the keep, their breath puffing in the chill air. Inside, the great hall filled with the day's bustle. Servants hurried with platters, the steward ticked off supplies with a quill, and Willow, now grown, married and mistress of the kitchens, oversaw it all with a keen eye and a sharper tongue. Arya greeted her with a nod, and Willow winked, her daughter tugging at her skirts, eyes full of mischief. Over breakfast, Rickon recounted news from the villages. A baby born in Barrowton, a wolf pack sighted near the Long Lake, a shipment of grain delayed by ice on the river. Arya listened, offering advice only when Rickon asked for it. She had learned in time that the best way to teach was to let her children and her people make their own choices, to stand behind them as a quiet strength, rather than a looming shadow. Later, in the solar, Arya sat at the long oak table, her ledger open before her. She wrote carefully, recording the names of those who had come to Winterfell for shelter, those given work, those who still needed homes. The North was never an easy land, but it had become a place of hope for many. Refugees from the South, orphans from war, old men and women with no kin, left but the wolves and the cold. It was not all kindness and hearth fires. Bandits still roamed the forests, and some lords grumbled at Arya's refusal to turn away the needy. She handled disputes with the same resolve she brought to battle, fair, but fierce. She would not see any under her protection suffer, not while she drew breath. That afternoon, Bran appeared at her door, silent as always. He was older now, stooped and frail, his eyes clouded but bright as ever. "You never tire, Arya," he said. She set down her pen. "Someone must keep watch while you wander your dreams, little brother." He smiled, the old, gentle Bran shining through. "There are dreams enough for both of us." They sat together in companionable silence. Through the window, Arya watched children playing in the snow. The children of the keep, her grandchildren and their friends, all bundled in furs, their laughter rising like song. Bran's voice drew her back. "I saw a white wolf running through the forest. It stopped and looked back at me." Arya stilled. "Nymeria. Perhaps," he said. "Or perhaps just memory. The wolves are never far from you, Arya." She thought of the bond that had linked her to Nymeria for all her life, a tie stronger than miles or time. Sometimes in her dreams, she ran with the great pack in the wild woods, and woke with snow in her hair and the taste of freedom on her tongue. "I hope she is well," Arya said, voice soft. "She is," Bran answered, and Arya, who trusted her brother in all things of earth and spirit, believed him. Evening fell, and the hall filled with the scent of roasting venison and fresh bread. Arya ate with her family, laughing at her youngest grandson's wild tales and listening to Rickon's wife recount the latest news from White Harbor. Later, she sat by the hearth with her old sword needle across her knees, remembering every friend and enemy that blade had tasted, every lesson it had taught her about the price of survival. News from the south came less often now, but sometimes a raven would bring a letter in Sansa's familiar, elegant hand. Sansa wrote of peace and progress, of new trade routes and old quarrels, of the children she and her lord husband had raised to rule the south with wisdom and strength. Her words were always tinged with longing, a sister's ache for home. One day, the letter brought darker tidings. The king in King's Landing descended not from Baratheon nor Lannister, but from some new southern house, had died suddenly. His heir was a boy, untested, and whispers of rebellion coiled through the riverlands and the Reach. Arya read the letter twice, then summoned her council. In the great hall, the banners of House Stark hung heavy, the direwolf watching as Rickon, Alys Karstark, Willow, Bran, and the other trusted voices gathered. "We must be wary," Arya said. "The south is restless. If the Riverlands fall to civil war, the north will be next." Aes nodded, her braids flecked with snow. "Should we muster men?" Quietly, Arya replied. "I will send ravens to White Harbor and the Dreadfort. We'll have the roads watched and the villages fortified, but we will not move until we must." Bran's voice, thin but sure, arose. "The storm will break in the south, not here, but when it does, we must be ready to shelter those who flee. It is the Stark way." Arya nodded. "And we will not break." The months that followed were tense. Rumors drifted north, of battles in the fields of the Reach, of lords executed for treason, of the Golden Lions of Lannister, clawing their way back into power. Arya slept less, her nights spent in council, or walking the ramparts, needle at her side. When refugees began to trickle north, Arya opened the gates of Winterfell, as she always had. Some called her soft, but Arya remembered hunger and exile. She would not harden her heart. One night, a girl of 10 years arrived at the gates, her cheeks raw from wind, her dress in tatters. Arya brought her to the kitchens, fed her soup, and sat with her by the hearth. "What's your name?" Arya asked. The girl's voice was a whisper. Brienne. Arya's heart ached at the name. A memory of a brave woman with a sword, a friend lost long ago. You're safe here, Brienne. You are part of the pack now. Brienne's eyes filled with tears, and she pressed close to Arya, who held her as she would have held her own child. That winter was harsh, but not unkind. The people of Winterfell endured, and Arya's strength never faltered. She oversaw the training of new guards, judged disputes over land, and listened to the old stories of the North at every feast. She made time for joy. Sledding with her grandchildren, sharing honey cakes with the orphans in the kitchens, dancing in the Great Hall during the spring festival. When the news finally came that the South had torn itself apart, Arya was ready. A host of southern refugees arrived at the gates, their numbers swollen by lords, knights, small folk, and even a few southern septons who sought the old gods for comfort. Arya welcomed them, offering food and shelter, and sent trusted men to keep order and peace. The southern lords expected a weak northern lady, one who could be swayed or cowed by titles and threats. Arya met them in the great hall, needle in hand, her voice calm but steel-edged. Winterfell is not for sale, she told them. Swear loyalty to the North, and you will find safety. Bring strife or treachery, and you will answer to me. Most bent the knee. A few did not, and were quietly escorted beyond the gates, never to return. As the months turned, Arya's reputation grew. Southern bards told tales of the Wolf Queen, the lady who ruled as fiercely as any lord, who fed the hungry and broke her enemies. Her legend was not one she had sought, but it served the North well. Winterfell's bannermen rallied to her cause. Its small folk found pride in their home, and even the wildlings beyond the wall sent messengers to honor her. One day, as Arya trained in the yard with Needle, a black-feathered raven arrived from the wilds. It bore a message from the king beyond the wall, who called Arya Sister Wolf, and asked for parley. Arya sent a reply of her own, and not long after, a party of free folk arrived at Winterfell, bearing gifts of pelts and bone charms. Arya greeted them in the Godswood, where the Heart Tree watched all. They spoke of peace, of shared blood and history, and of the need for unity in a world grown cold and hard. That night, Arya sat by the fire, her family gathered close. She listened to the laughter, the music, the thrum of life all around her. She knew, with a deep certainty, that this was her legacy, not in swords drawn or enemies slain, but in the bonds she had forged, the pact she had strengthened, the home she had rebuilt. In the final years of her life, Arya took pleasure in small things. The taste of warm bread, the sound of children's laughter, the quiet hush of the Godswood after snow. She spent long hours teaching the next generation all she knew. From swordplay to diplomacy to the stories of the Starks who had come before. She told them of Ned and Catelyn, of Robb and Sansa and Bran, of Jon Snow, the brother who had always been her other half. And sometimes, on clear nights, she would slip away from the keep, climb the highest tower, and gaze at the stars. She would remember running through the dark with Nymeria at her side, the thrill of the unknown, the endless promise of the road. But she felt no longing, no ache for what might have been. She had found her place, and it was enough. When the time came for Arya Stark to leave the world, she asked only for her family beside her and the sound of wolves howling in the dark. As she slipped away, she felt the presence of all those she had loved. Her father's gentle hand, her mother's soft voice, the warm embrace of her brothers and sisters, the fierce pride of her children, the trust of her people. In her last breath, Arya whispered the words that had guided her life. The pack survives. And so it was that Arya Stark, Lady of Winterfell, passed into legend, not as a shadow, not as a killer, but as the heart of her home, the hope of her people, the wolf who never ran, but stood and fought and loved until the very end. Arya's passing was mourned by the entire North, but there was no chaos, no descent into bickering or fear. The transition of power was smooth, the pack she'd so carefully nurtured standing strong in the wake of her loss. Rickon Stark took up the mantle of Lord of Winterfell with quiet gravity, his mother's lessons and spirit guiding him as surely as any written will. His sisters, Lyanna and Eddora, stood at his side, each already renowned for her courage and cunning, and the people saw in them the old fire of the wolf blood that had ruled Winterfell since the dawn of the first men. It was a time of reckoning and remembrance. For a fortnight, all work in the keep ceased. The high lords of the north rode through snowdrifts and late spring winds to pay their respects. The small folk, too, journeyed from distant villages, their sleds laden with flowers and simple tokens. Stitched wolves, lengths of ribbon, carved wooden deer wolves, gifts from a grateful people. At Arya's funeral feast, stories filled the hall like music, tales of her days as a wild child in the halls, her impossible courage during the lean winters, the time she'd ridden out to face bandits herself, the way she'd sheltered every orphan, every exile, every lost soul with nowhere else to go. They laid her to rest beneath the heart tree, as she'd asked, beside her father and mother, with needle in her hand. It was Willow who led the orphans in a song of farewell, her voice trembling but strong, and in the quiet that followed, the wind set the red leaves shivering, a sound, some would later swear, that echoed Arya's own laughter. For a time the world felt hollowed, as if the sun itself paused out of respect. Rickon ruled with care, never forgetting that Winterfell was not his alone, but belonged to the pack, to the north. He kept the traditions alive, the great wolf banners flying, the doors open to the lost and the needy. Arya's grandchildren ran through the halls as she once had, wild and unafraid, while the elders watched with pride, certain that her legacy would never be forgotten. But beyond the walls, the world turned as it always did, and soon the north found itself once more at the heart of things. The war in the south, once distant, crept closer. Fugitives trickled over the neck, bringing tales of slaughter and fire, and with them, rumors of a new power rising along the Trident. The Riverlands, always restless, had thrown off their southern overlords, and the banner now raised over Harrenhal was a silver trout upon a field of blue. House Tully restored, but with new blood and untested ambition. Rickon called his council. Lyanna and Eddora joined him, along with Alys Karstark, now gray but sharp as a blade, Willow of the Kitchens, Maester Baron, and the tall scarred commander of the guard, Hal Mullen's grandson. They pored over maps by firelight, Rickon's voice steady as he laid out the facts. We've sheltered thousands fleeing the wars. The south is unstable. Our grain feeds half the Riverlands as it is. If Lord Edmure Tully's kin rise, what will they want from the north? Then now, Alys pursed her lips. Tithes, soldiers, and perhaps more. Perhaps a seat at Winterfell, to bind the old alliances by blood. Eddora grinned, fierce and cold. Let them come. The north was never theirs to command. Maester Baron's voice was measured, cautious. The people are weary, my lord. They long for peace. Rickon nodded. Peace, yes. But not at the cost of our freedom. Lyanna, her eyes sharp as chips of ice, turned to her brother. Mother taught us to listen. We will send envoys. We will not be drawn into a war that is not ours. But we will not be caught unprepared. Men know why. They agreed on a plan. Riders left Winterfell at dawn, bearing letters of friendship and warning to the Lords of the Neck, to White Harbor and the Dreadfort, to the new Tully at Harrenhal. At the same time, Rickon quietly strengthened the garrisons along the southern marches. Eddora herself led the patrols, her sword known and feared from Last Hearth to Moat Cailin. Lyanna managed the Ravens, keeping lines of communication open to every lord and landholder north of the Barrowlands. Winterfell bustled with purpose. The smiths hammered out spearheads and arrowheads. The archers drilled on the ramparts, and even the smallest children knew to fetch water, stack wood, and keep the larders full. The south might burn, but the north would be ready. In the quieter moments, Rickon would walk alone through the Godswood. He spoke to Arya, to the Heart Tree, to all the ghosts who watched over Winterfell. He did not feel alone, not truly. Her memory was a living thing, as present as the wind in the boughs, the snow underfoot, the echo of wolves in the distance. Sometimes, when his doubts pressed in, He remembered how his mother would meet his gaze and say, "You are a wolf, Rickon. The pack survives." The envoys returned by midsummer. Their news was mixed. Lord Tully's new line was strong and hungry. They wanted peace with the North, but demanded grain and gold in exchange. In White Harbor, the Manderleys chafed at the endless tide of refugees, but remained loyal. In the western hills, the Umbers sent word of wildlings slipping past the wall. No longer a true barrier, but a relic crumbling stone by stone. Rickon met with his council and his siblings in the Solar. "We give what we can," he said, "but we do not bleed the North dry. We keep our swords sharp, our gates open for those in true need, but we do not march unless there is no other choice." Eddora bristled, but Lyanna stilled her with a look. Mother would have done the same. And so, the North held its ground. The Southern wars raged on, battles lost and won far from Winterfell's walls. The refugees who came found shelter and honest work, and some chose to stay, intermarrying with the Northmen, bringing new blood and new stories to the old stones. For the first time in living memory, Winterfell began to change in small, quiet ways. In the kitchens, spices from the Reach flavored the stews. In the yard, a Riverlands boy taught new songs to the children, and his sister grew into a scribe, recording the stories of the Old North alongside tales of the Trident. Eddora took a wife from the wildlings, a woman with hair white as snow and a spirit to match her own. Lyanna fostered 2 orphaned girls from the Vale, raising them as Starks in all but name. The pack grew stronger, richer, more diverse. The bonds of blood and loyalty stretched, but did not break. In the winter that followed, another storm swept the land. News came that the new Tully Lord was dead, poisoned by his own kin. The Riverlands fractured once more. Bands of desperate men, turned out by war and hunger, drifted north. Some begged for aid. Others came with swords drawn, hoping to seize what they could not earn. Rickon rode out with Eddora and 100 sworn swords to confront a band that had set fire to a northern village. The fight was brief and brutal. Northerners, hardened by cold and hardship, would not yield to southern marauders. When it was done, Rickon rode among the survivors and knelt by a dying boy, no older than his own son. The boy looked up at him, eyes wide with pain and fear. "Why? Why do you help us? My father fought against your people." Rickon took the boy's hand, voice gentle. "Because we remember what it is to be hunted, to be hungry. My mother taught me that mercy is not weakness, and that the pack survives together." "Ben Sel." The boy wept, and Rickon stayed with him until his eyes closed forever. Word of the Lord's mercy spread. Fewer bands dared trouble the North, and those who did soon found themselves outmatched and outnumbered. The wildlings, once feared, now patrolled the borders with Winterfell's blessing, and the children of the pack learned from their southern friends the ways of the woods and rivers, blending knowledge and custom until there was no longer north or south, but only those loyal to the wolf banner. Years passed. Rickon's children grew, and their children after them. The memory of war faded, replaced by stories of rebuilding, of hard winters survived, of a North that had become a haven for the lost and the brave. Arya's name was spoken not only in Winterfell, but in every hall and hearth, from White Harbor to the last hearth, from the Dreadfort to Bear Island. Bards sang of her, of the Lady Wolf who ruled not with fear, but with a sword and an open hand. In time, the world beyond the Neck stabilized. A new king rose in the south, wise enough to value peace with the north. Trade resumed, the roads grew safer, and Winterfell prospered as it had not since before the wars. But no peace is ever perfect or eternal. One bitter spring, a sickness swept the land. It came first to the coast, carried by traders from distant shores, and soon spread inland. Maester Baron worked day and night, but the fever claimed hundreds, and for a time, even the halls of Winterfell were hushed by grief. Lyanna, who had become a legend in her own right, took up her mother's old tasks, walking among the sick, comforting the dying, organizing healers and food. Eddora rode south to seek aid from the maesters of Old Town, braving bandits and disease alike, returning with herbs and new medicines. Rickon, older now but unbowed, held counsel in the yard, hearing every plea, settling every dispute with fairness and resolve. It was during this darkness that the people looked once more to the memory of Arya Stark. Her likeness, carved in wood and stone, adorned the gates and hearths of Winterfell. Old Willow led the children in song, and at night, beneath the stars, the wolves howled in unison, a reminder that they were never truly alone. Slowly, the sickness ebbed. The living mourned the lost, but life continued. The pack, battered, endured. In the spring that followed, Rickon led his family and his people into the Godswood. The Heart Tree, older than any living man, watched as they gathered to honor the dead and bless the living. Lyanna's voice, strong and clear, rang out over the hush. "We have survived worse. We are the blood of the wolf, the children of Arya, and Eddard, and Catelyn. The pack endures." A hush fell as the wind stirred the branches. Some swore they saw a silver wolf among the red leaves, watching, approving. Others, less fanciful, simply felt a sense of peace. A certainty that so long as they remembered, so long as they stood together, no power in the world could break them. In the days and years that followed, the North continued to change, as all living things must. But the heart of Winterfell remained the same, a place of courage and stubborn love, of loyalty and fierce justice. The stories of Arya Stark grew into legend, but her spirit lingered in every act of kindness, every victory over darkness, every wolf-blooded child born in the cold. And so, as the generations turned, the people of the North remembered the words she had lived by. They taught them to their children and their children's children, so that no matter what storms might come, the pack would always survive. Winters in the North always returned, no matter how gentle the summers or how golden the harvests that sometimes graced the land. The passing of Arya Stark had been a wound, a sorrow that would never fully heal. But it became a memory woven into every hearth and hall, a guiding presence rather than a shadow. Her children, her people, and their descendants did not let her spirit fade into the mists of history. Instead, they lived by her example: resilience, honesty, and the unyielding loyalty of the pack. In the years that followed, Winterfell itself seemed to stand prouder and taller. The walls, rebuilt stone by stone after fire and siege, became as strong as the ancient legends. The towers rang with music and laughter in spring, and in the deep midwinter, the kitchen sent up the smell of roasting meat and sweet baked apples. The Godswood, sacred and silent, saw more footsteps than it had since before the long wars. Every Stark child, noble visitor, and even the distant kin of wildlings came to sit beneath the Heart Tree, seeking peace or strength in its shadow. Rickon Stark, Lord of Winterfell, proved himself a ruler worthy of his mother's name. His beard turned gray, but his voice never lost its warmth or steel. He called the banners in times of trouble, and men rode to him willingly from every corner of the North, secure in the knowledge that their loyalty would be honored and repaid. When the Southern lords begged for the North's aid or envoys arrived with gifts, Rickon met them with courtesy and keen-eyed caution, always mindful of the lessons Arya had left him. Trust, but never blindly. Defend your own, but do not close your heart to mercy. Lyanna and Eddard stood at his side, their influence shaping Winterfell in ways their ancestors might never have imagined. Lyanna was the court's wisdom, a shrewd negotiator and a loving aunt, her laughter echoing through the solar even as she pored over ledgers and treaties. Eddard, taller and broader than most men, led hunts and drills with the castle's guards and often rode out into the wild, keeping peace with the free folk and wildlings who had become allies and kin in all but name. The North prospered. White Harbor grew into a bustling port, ships coming and going with goods from as far as Old Town and the Summer Isles. The Dreadfort, once a name to inspire fear, was now held by the children of a southern knight who had married into House Bolton at Arya's behest, an alliance built on trust, trade, and the promise of peace. Even Bear Island sent its best to Winterfell's courts, the Mormonts proud to see their daughters taught swordplay and their sons the art of command. The children of Arya's line, her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, carried the wolf blood in myriad forms. Some were quiet, scholars and singers, happiest in the library or by the fire with stories. Others were wild and bold, running through the woods and leaping the walls in the moonlight, as their matriarch had done. But all felt the weight of her legacy, the need to protect, to serve, to keep the North a place of safety and strength in a world still prone to chaos. As the seasons turned, the troubles of the South rarely reached Winterfell's walls. Kings and queens in King's Landing came and went, crowns changing hands through war, marriage, or treachery. The North watched, wary but patient, learning to keep its distance while extending a hand to those in honest need. Occasionally, a Southern lord's son or daughter was fostered in Winterfell, growing into a friend and ambassador rather than a rival or enemy. These bonds paid dividends when the Reach was struck by blight, and grain from the north saved half a dozen southern villages. Or when storms wrecked ships along the western coast and the North sent men to help rebuild. But peace was never the North's only teacher. Sickness, hunger, and wild beasts remained threats, and Rickon's council met every challenge head-on. In one particularly brutal winter, with ice closing the White Knife and wolves ranging hungrily near the villages, it was Arya's granddaughter Mara who suggested a bold solution. "The pack," she reminded them, "survives together, not by hoarding but by sharing." Under Rickon's command, the stores of Winterfell were thrown open, and grain distributed to the distant hamlets. In return, the small folk brought timber and livestock to the castle, strengthening both the hold and the hearts of its people. Spring came late that year, but it came, and the gratitude of the North was more than words. Fields were replanted, the walls repaired, and every hand, from the humblest stable boy to the highest lord, turned to the work. Mara, clever and sharp-tongued, soon became a favorite of the council, her voice carrying the weight of her great-grandmother's legacy. On the first thaw, a party from the wildlings arrived, now calling themselves the Free Folk, a name that had shed its old sting. They brought gifts of furs and tales of a new threat rising beyond the wall. Strange lights in the sky, vanished hunters, the uneasy sense that something old was stirring beneath the ice. Rickon, Lyanna, Adara, and Mara listened well, their faces grave. Old tales whispered of ancient magics, of giants and the ghosts of dead kings. It was Mara who spoke first. "We must see with our own eyes. If the North is to be safe, we must know what walks beyond the wall." A party was assembled. Mara, Edera, a dozen free folk, and several of the castle's best rangers. They rode north at dawn, vanishing into the white silence. And for weeks, the castle waited, uneasy but resolute, as wolves must be when the lead hunter is gone. When Mara returned, it was with news both troubling and hopeful. The old magics, she said, were not gone from the land. In the deep wild, beneath the dancing auroras, the free folk had found a cave where the bones of giants lay entwined with iron and dragonglass. No threat stirred yet, but the land itself was changing, warming in some places, freezing harder in others. The old stories, she warned, should never be forgotten. Winterfell listened. Under Rickon's guidance, the old tales were set to parchment, the libraries expanded, and children grew up learning not just how to fight, but how to remember. The wise women of the woods and the maesters of the tower worked side by side, preserving lore in case the North ever again faced darkness out of legend. With each generation, the boundaries between Northmen and free folk, between lord and small folk, softened further. The bonds of pack grew wider, embracing all who chose to stand beneath the direwolf banner. There were quarrels and old grudges. No land is ever free of such things. But the principles Arya had lived by outlasted every storm. Justice, unity, compassion for the lost. The North was not perfect, but it was whole. Many decades later, in a new spring, when the apple trees in the Godswood burst into bloom, and the young played in the shadow of the heart tree, Rickon, white-haired but unbowed, stood before the assembled folk of Winterfell. His great-grandchildren gathered at his side, and the banners of every house in the North, new and old, wildling and noble, fluttered in the breeze. He spoke simply, as his mother had before him. "We are the blood of wolves, the heart of the North. Our home stands because we stand together. Let no fear, no hunger, no ancient threat divide us. Remember the stories. Remember the pack." There was silence, then the soft sound of many voices rising together. The pack survives. That evening, as the sun set in gold and purple over the fields, Rickon walked into the godswood one last time. He knelt by the heart tree, pressing his hand to the weathered trunk. His children and their children joined him, and for a moment, the air was filled with the warmth of all who had come before. Arya's courage, Eddard's honor, Catelyn's love, Sansa's grace, Jon's fierce loyalty, Bran's gentle wisdom. All were present in the stillness, watching over the land they had built. The years continued to turn, each bringing its own troubles and joys, but Winterfell stood, a living testament to the girl who had chosen home over shadow, duty over wandering, love over vengeance. In every blade of grass, every howl of a wolf on the wind, the story of Arya Stark was told anew. The world outside the north often forgot the lessons of the wolves. Kingdoms rose and fell, petty wars were fought and lost, but the tales of the Lady Wolf endured. Southern scribes sometimes turned her story into legend. A child of shadows, a knife in the dark, a queen who never wore a crown. But in the north, her memory was something real and true. A wild girl who learned to lead, a woman who held her family together, a lady who ruled with heart and sword in equal measure. And so, each year on the first snow, the children of Winterfell ran into the godswood, their laughter rising into the frosted air. They would kneel beneath the heart tree, recite the words their mothers and fathers had taught them, and leave a token. A feather, a wooden wolf, a braid of hair or string, for the spirit of Arya Stark. In the deep silence that followed, some swore they heard a wolf's cry in the distance, ancient, wild, and joyful. The North remembers, and the pack survives. Okay. Time pressed forward with a measured inevitability, and with each turning season, Winterfell grew not only in strength but in the quiet certainty that the legacy of Arya Stark would endure long after even her grandchildren became old and gray. In those halls, memory was not a relic, but a living current, threading through every custom, each festival, every tale told by firelight on long winter nights. What had begun as the stubborn determination of a single girl became the rootstock of a culture. Proud, fierce, and fiercely compassionate. The North was never idle. Life in the ancient stronghold demanded more than blood or title. The pack, so often invoked in the stories of Arya's day, became more than metaphor, an ever-present reality for all who lived behind Winterfell's walls, or answered its call. From the lowest scullion to the lords of the greatest houses, all were bound by oaths and shared hardship. As old age crept upon Rickon Stark, his children and their children flourished, guided by the counsel of kin and trusted friends, rather than the tyranny of a single ruler. In time, the Stark tradition shifted from solitary leadership to a ruling council, headed by a chosen Stark, but always consulting the wisdom of the pack. Mara Stark, fierce-eyed and soft-voiced, was chosen as the new Lady of Winterfell. She carried herself with a humility rare in great lords, never shy to seek advice or lend a hand in the work of the keep. Under her stewardship, Winterfell's walls were expanded and strengthened, the broken towers rebuilt and the godswood protected. She saw that the castle's stores overflowed not just with grain and salted meats, but with books, tools, and medicines from far and near. Mara fostered relationships across the north that her grandmother Arya could have only dreamed of: regular parley with the free folk at the wall, open trade with White Harbor, and even lands across the narrow sea. She invited scholars from Old Town and the Summer Islands to teach, and in her time, the children of Winterfell learned to read Valyrian as easily as the Old Tongue of the North. But Mara never allowed the hallmarks of progress to sever Winterfell's deepest roots. When the full moon crowned the sky, she led the old rites in the godswood, teaching the youngest of her kin to listen for the rustle of the wind, the cry of the wolves, and the distant, timeless voice that seemed to hum in the heart tree. Each autumn, she presided over the ancient harvest feast, where the hall filled with wild music, laughter, and tales. Many of them of Arya, running barefoot and untamed across the yard, her eyes full of defiance and hope. There were still challenges, of course. No age is free from the gnawing of uncertainty. One year, a fever swept the north, and for a time the crypts filled faster than the cradles. Maester Ronald, who had grown old at Mara's side, worked tirelessly with the healers and wise women. Mara herself went from bedside to bedside, her hands never idle, her words steady and gentle. When the sickness finally broke, the survivors remembered how she had grieved with them, and how she had restored their hope with her stubborn presence. It was also in Mara's time that word came of a new threat stirring in the distant east, a fleet of sell-sails, pirates and exiles, who raided the coast near White Harbor. Some sought to ransom noble children, others simply to steal. The North answered as it always had, together. Arya, now old but still formidable, raised a host and rode to White Harbor with Mara and a force of free folk archers. What followed was less a war than a series of sharp lessons for the would-be invaders. The North's defense was a patchwork of all its peoples, noble and wildling, merchant and farmer, each guarding the other's flanks, each fighting for something larger than themselves. When the pirates at last abandoned the coast, driven off by the fierce unity of the North, their stories would be told for a generation in ports as far as Bravos and Pentos. The North is not to be trifled with, not for gold or vengeance or dreams of conquest. In the aftermath, Mara and Arya returned to Winterfell with new friends and new scars. The harvest that year was meager, but no one starved. For the pack once again pooled its stores, every hall giving and receiving as need demanded. There were marriages between northern girls and free folk, and the sons and daughters of pirates who chose to stay, finding in the cold a strange and fierce belonging. The years unfolded with both peace and trouble in equal measure, but always Winterfell endured. The Council of the Pack became tradition. In each generation, a new Stark led, always with the blessing and counsel of kin and chosen family. Some Starks were warriors, others healers, others quiet philosophers, or clever diplomats. The diversity of the pack became the North's strength. No one talent or path was prized above all others, so long as it served the good of the people. One autumn, as Mara's hair turned white and her eyes grew clouded, she summoned her kin to the Godswood for a council. The air was brisk, and the leaves overhead glowed scarlet and gold. In the stillness beneath the heart tree, she spoke of the future. The North will always need wolves, guardians and guides. Yes, but also healers, dreamers, teachers. Each of you must carry your own piece of our legacy. Remember Arya Stark. Not just for the blade she carried, but for the home she built. Remember that the pack survives, but only if we hold fast to one another. Bento. Her words were carried by the wind and remembered by every soul present. When Mara passed into the arms of the old gods, the North wept for her, as it had for Arya, but with less fear, for the pack was stronger than ever. In the decades that followed, the stories of Arya Stark became legend, then myth, but always with a core of truth. She was remembered not as a shadow or assassin, but as the wild girl who became the heart of her house, the lady who taught the North to be brave and kind and steadfast. Her spirit lingered in every corner of the keep. Her name whispered by children. Her likeness carved in the beams above the hearth. Her sword needle displayed not as a weapon, but as a symbol of perseverance and courage. Winterfell became a beacon for all the North, and for those far beyond. Wandering singers from the summer islands or the free cities would come, drawn by tales of a land where justice was fair, and the pack was strong. Merchants brought silks and spices, but they also brought news. That southern kings still squabbled, that wars flared and faded, that even in distant Valyria, some had heard of the Lady Wolf of Winterfell. In time, scholars began to chronicle the line of Starks who followed Arya. They wrote of how the North never bent the knee again, not to the south, nor to any foreign lord. Instead, it grew into a realm of quiet might, known for its independence, its fierce loyalty, and its readiness to defend those who had nowhere else to go. The world outside changed in ways even Bran the Dreamer could not have foreseen. The dragons, once returned to the world, vanished again. The maesters uncovered lost secrets, and new magics flickered and faded in distant lands. But Winterfell, bound by story and stone, weathered every storm. And always, on the first snow of winter, the people of the north, noble and common, wildling and city-born, would gather beneath the heart tree to speak the names of their dead, to tell stories of survival, to promise again that no matter what darkness fell across the land, the pack would endure. Sometimes it was said a white wolf would be seen at the edge of the wood, watching, just out of reach. Sometimes, in the quiet between the wind and the fire, the children of Winterfell would hear laughter, wild, fierce, and free, carried on the northern breeze. The years rolled on, but the north remembered. And so long as there were wolves in the woods, children in the halls, and hope kindling in every hearth, the story of Arya Stark, Lady of Winterfell, heart of her house, the wild girl who stayed, would never truly end. The heart tree of Winterfell, ancient and gnarled, bore silent witness to another turning of the seasons, its red leaves drifting down through snow and sunlight, blanketing the earth where so many Starks had knelt, prayed, mourned, and hoped. Beneath its branches, as the North marched on through another generation, a sense of quiet fulfillment settled upon Winterfell. The cycles of struggle and endurance had woven the Starks so tightly into the land's tapestry that not even the winds of change could unravel them. The Council of the Pack, Mara's lasting innovation, became the beating heart of governance, so familiar and trusted that even southern scribes marveled at its stability. No lord or lady ruled alone. The wisdom of many voices became the North's shield and compass. Each new council, drawn from Stark blood and the most loyal of their bannermen, brought fresh ideas and unclouded eyes to the ever-evolving challenges of the realm. When a summer harvest failed in the Barrowlands, it was the council that organized relief, sending carts of grain and casks of salt fish from Winterfell's stores. When a long drought sparked fires in the deep woods, the council sent foresters and free folk to control the flames, fighting beside each other as if no other way had ever existed. The younger generations embraced these duties, raised to believe that every hand mattered and every voice should be heard. Arya's memory was their inheritance, and no one wore it lightly. Her great-great-granddaughter, Selyse Stark, emerged as a bright star among them. A girl with her mother's quick wit, her father's shrewd eyes, and the wolf blood that never seemed to dilute, no matter how many generations passed. Selyse, raised on stories of Arya's wildness and Mara's gentleness, learned to walk the walls of Winterfell with her head held high and her mind open. Selyse was not content merely to study. She sought out every part of the North, traveling from the windswept White Knife to the towering cliffs of Bear Island, from the Manderley markets in White Harbor to the quiet, snow-blanketed villages hugging the wall. Wherever she went, she listened, learning the dialects and customs of every folk. She spent weeks among the free folk, sharing their rough bread and sharp laughter. And she watched the orphans in Winterfell's kitchens with a thoughtful eye, remembering how Arya's kindness had changed lives. When Selyse came of age, the council chose her to join its ranks, breaking precedent to accept one so young. Some grumbled, but the older Starks, who remembered Mara's words under the heart tree, insisted that youth and new perspective were the marrow of the pack's endurance. Selyse brought new questions to the table. How could Winterfell's wisdom be shared with the southern kingdoms, so they too could weather famine and war without tearing themselves apart? Could the North send teachers as well as grain, healers, as well as steel? It was Selyse's idea to build the Hall of Learning, a wide timbered structure attached to Winterfell's library and open to all, noble or lowborn, northern or foreign. Here, anyone who wished could study the histories of the North, the healing arts, sword play, letters and numbers, even the secret runes of the first men, taught by gray-bearded wildlings and ink-stained maesters alike. Selyse herself led many lessons, speaking of Arya's journey from wild girl to Lady of Winterfell, and always ending with the same simple creed: every wolf matters. The Hall of Learning quickly became a beacon, drawing children from all corners of the north, and even the south. Sons of lords and daughters of shepherds sat side by side on the rush-strewn floor, listening to tales of the long night and the pack that survived because they stood together. From time to time, a bard from the Reach or a merchant's apprentice from Old Town would stay for a season, trading news and stories for knowledge and friendship. Winterfell's legend spread wider than ever, and for the first time in many generations, young Starks traveled south not as hostages or envoys, but as honored guests and teachers. Yet even as Winterfell's star rose, the world beyond did not sleep. The South, never fully at peace, was ruled by a cunning young queen whose ambition was whispered about in every tavern. She eyed the North's wealth and unity with a mixture of envy and admiration, sending honeyed letters and lavish gifts, but always probing for weakness. When her messengers came to Winterfell, Selyse and her council received them with warmth but not naivety. One day, a southern envoy arrived with a bold proposal. The queen wished to marry her only son to a Stark daughter, binding the North and South at last. The council debated for many days, but Selyse, recalling Arya's aversion to being bartered like a prize, argued that no marriage should be made for ambition alone. "We do not trade wolves for crowns," she said. "Let the South prove its good faith in other ways." The council agreed, sending a gift of fine furs and a promise of friendship, but no betrothal. The queen accepted this with outward grace, but spies soon reported that she sought other means to draw the North closer. Alliances of coin and threat, rumors spread among the bannermen, subtle bribes. The Starks watched these maneuvers carefully, but did not waver. Their roots ran deep, and the council's wisdom, drawn from years of hardship, shielded them better than any wall of ice or stone. When a minor lord in the Neck rebelled and called for southern aid, the council sent Selyse herself, not with an army but with a feast and her famous patience. In 3 days, she had listened to every grievance, broken bread with the old lord's children, and persuaded him to kneel before Winterfell again. Not with threats. As the decades slipped by, Selyse's Hall of Learning became as much a symbol as the heart tree itself. Whenever the North faced hardship, it was the lessons learned and taught there, of unity, compassion, and cunning, that saw them through. Even in the most bitter winters, no village starved and no child was left alone. The wolf banner flew high above the walls, not just as a warning to would-be conquerors, but as an invitation. Here you may find a place, if you are loyal, if you are brave, if you are willing to fight for the pack. The day came when Selyse was chosen as Lady of Winterfell, the first since Mara to hold the title with the full blessing of every house, wildling band, and bannerman. She stood beneath the heart tree, her voice steady and clear, reciting the vows Arya herself had spoken so many generations before. "I will defend the North, not for glory nor for vengeance, but for the pack, that none may face the cold alone." Her siblings flanked her: Edric, solemn and careful, keeper of the gates; Hara, bright and fierce, a renowned rider; and little Arya, named for the Lady Wolf herself, whose laughter filled the halls. Their mother, Mara's daughter, watched from the front row, pride glistening in her tired eyes. The years of Selyse's rule were marked by peace, but also by ambition. Ambition, not for conquest, but for wisdom, for understanding, for a North where no voice was lost, and no life was wasted. Under her guidance, the wolf banner became the sigil not just of a family, but of a philosophy, one that spread by trade, by song, by the example of strong, just leadership. The world beyond changed, as it always had, and always would. The Southern Queen's line eventually failed, her kingdom splintering into squabbling fiefdoms, while the North watched and waited, never forgetting that old threats could return when least expected. Now and then, a traveler brought rumors of shadowy powers gathering in the distant east, or of dragons glimpsed in the smoking hills of Valeria. The old maesters, grown gray and wise in Winterfell's halls, counseled vigilance and humility. But the North did not close itself off. Instead, it welcomed the restless, the dreamers, the exiles. Among the children in the Hall of Learning were some who carried strange accents and stranger stories, children of traders and adventurers and lost southern lines. They were all taught the same: that honor is not found in a name, but in the choices made when the snows close in and the world grows cold. In her final days, Selisa walked to Godswood each evening, often with little Arya or one of the orphans at her side. She told stories not just of Arya Stark, but of all the wolves who came after, of Mara's counsel, of Rickon's kindness, of Edora's wild courage, of the free folk who made the North their own. Under the boughs of the heart tree, she would listen for the old magic in the air, the whisper of leaves, the call of distant wolves. When she died, as all must, her funeral drew thousands to Winterfell. The banners of every house in the North were joined by strange new sigils from distant lands. In the Godswood, her kin and her people promised anew that the pack would endure, come what may. Years passed, and the world changed again and again. But always, when the snows began to fall, the people of the North would gather beneath the heart tree, honoring the wild girl who chose home over wandering, kindness over conquest, unity over division. And somewhere, in the deep of the woods, the wolves howled their agreement, their voices carrying the story onward, never to be lost. The North remembers. The pack survives. And so long as there are children to teach, stories to tell, and wolves beneath the trees, the spirit of Arya Stark, Lady of Winterfell, heart of her house, the wild girl who became the North, would remain unbroken, running wild through legend and memory, as constant as the seasons and as true as the North itself. Okay. Beneath the hoarfrost crust of another long winter, life in Winterfell pulsed on. Steady and strong, like the heartbeat of a great slumbering wolf. The Council of the Pack had become a tradition more enduring than iron. Each year, new voices joined the table. Daughters and sons of wildlings, distant cousins of Manderley and Karstark, former orphans of the kitchen and scullery, all woven together into the tapestry. Arya Stark had spun in the long-ago days when she first took her father's seat. The old gods watched, their red leaves shivering above the Godswood, as the North entered an era that would later be called its Golden Peace. The Hall of Learning bustled even in winter. Firelight glowing through its high windows, where children scribbled runes and sang the old songs in dozens of accents and dialects. No one here was turned away for want of coin or kin. It was said that a lone child, lost on the King's Road, need only whisper, Winterfell, and the wind itself would guide them to its gates. Even with the South fractured into warring principalities, the North was a beacon. Travelers arrived with stories and gifts, dried figs from lice, spiced honey wine from the arbor, scrolls in the swirling Essosi script, the kitchen filled with new scents, and the walls with new voices. Each spring, when the ice melted from the lakes and rivers, boats would arrive from White Harbor and even distant Bravos, bringing merchants and scholars who sought the peace and wisdom that had come to define Arya's line. Yet the true wealth of Winterfell was not measured in coin or spice, but in memory and resolve. Stories, living things, were carried from hearth to hearth, from old to young. The tale of Arya, wild and untamable, who became the wolf at the center of the pack, was told every first snowfall, each retelling shaping the future as much as honoring the past. It was during this golden age that Arya Stark, granddaughter of Selise and a student of both sword and song, came of age. Her hair was black as a raven's wing, her eyes clear and gray. She ran the battlements at dawn and read ancient books in the Hall of Learning at dusk, always curious, always restless. Arya was chosen by the council to journey beyond the North, first to White Harbor, then across the narrow sea, seeking knowledge to bring home to her people. In Bravos, she learned the art of diplomacy and the value of a secret kept or shared at the right moment. In the shadowed libraries of Old Town, she uncovered half-lost histories of the first men and the children, finding in old songs and faded maps the roots of the power that still lingered in the north. She returned, not with gold or foreign fashions, but with new words, new ideas, and a conviction that the strength of Winterfell lay not in its walls but in the open hands and open hearts of its people. Upon her return, Arya was greeted not just by her family, but by the entire castle, the banners of 100 households bright against the last snows. She embraced her siblings and knelt before the council, pledging to serve Winterfell in whatever role was needed: warrior, healer, singer, or scribe. Her father, Lord Edric, now ailing and wise, passed her the ancient sword of the pack, not ice which had vanished into legend, but needle. The slender blade that had first been Arya's and was now the symbol of courage and service. With Arya's guidance, the council redoubled its commitment to the Hall of Learning, expanding it until it rivaled the old citadel in its reach. Maesters and woods witches taught side by side. Children learned not just of war and politics, but of healing. Stewardship and the Weirwood's mysteries. When famine struck a southern principality, it was a Stark-trained healer who crossed the mountains to save hundreds. When a new trade route opened, it was a bard from Winterfell whose song convinced hard-bitten merchants to set aside their rivalry and work together. Yet peace, even golden, cannot last forever. The South's principalities, jealous and desperate, formed a brittle alliance and sent envoys north. They sought a promise of non-interference from Winterfell, worried that the growing influence of the Hall of Learning and the unity of the pack might inspire rebellion in their own lands. The council, with Arya at its head, heard them in the solar one crisp autumn morning. The Southerners, dressed in silks and heavy with suspicion, pleaded their case. The North is strong, yes, but must it meddle? Will you teach our peasants to read, our daughters to fight, our sons to dream of freedom? Arya listened, needle sharp. When they finished, she smiled, not with scorn, but with a deep, quiet understanding. The North will teach any who come in peace, no matter their birth or tongue, she replied. But we will not force your lands to change. Change will come because your people are hungry for it, and because you cannot wall out the wind. Nor will Winterfell turn away those who flee cruelty or hunger, no matter whose banner chases them. Her answer unsettled the envoys, but they had no grounds for war. They returned to their fractious courts with tales of Winterfell's unshakable resolve, and the peace held, if only because no southern army could hope to breach the unity, discipline, and deep magic of the pack. As the decades turned, the world beyond shifted. Ships brought word that the shattered free cities of Essos were uniting under a new banner, one that valued knowledge and trade as much as sword and coin. Many of their envoys sought counsel in Winterfell, where the balance between ancient custom and innovation was most finely struck. Arya's sister, Lyara, learned High Valyrian and served as translator, forging alliances that brought prosperity to the distant corners of the north. It was during this time that the old maester died, and Arya herself presided over the selection of his replacement. For the first time in living memory, the council chose not a man of the citadel, but a woman, a former wildling healer named Mira, learned in both the ways of the old gods and the writings of distant lands. Under her care, the sick grew strong, and the tales of Winterfell's wisdom spread still farther. Children grew, became counselors and warriors and teachers in their turn, each inheriting the burden and joy of Arya's legacy. Each was taught, from earliest days, that their strength was not in birth or blood alone, but in what they gave to the pack. On Arya's last winter, she walked the Godswood alone beneath a sky choked with stars. She pressed her hand to the heart tree's bark, feeling the sap's slow movement beneath her palm. the pulse of the north, ancient and inexorable. You endure because you change. She whispered to the old gods and to Arya's restless spirit. Somewhere in the bones of the land, at her passing, the council convened beneath the heart tree, as they always did. Needle passed to Hara's eldest, a quiet boy named Benjen, who had a poet's heart and a wolf's stubbornness. The torch never faltered, and the hall never emptied. From year to year, the banners in the great hall changed. But always, above them all, flew the gray direwolf, Arya's gift to the world, the promise that none would ever again stand alone in the dark. Each year, the Hall of Learning marked Arya's birth with stories and contests. Children running wild through the yard, climbing, sparring, singing, sharing food and dreams. Each year, as the pack howled at the rising moon, her memory ran in every vein, her laughter echoed in every stone. The South called the North strange, proud, unyielding. The rest of the world called it wise. In every corner where men and women longed for a place to belong, the tales of the Lady Wolf were retold, shaping lives and choices, inspiring courage in the face of storm and sorrow. And so the cycle continued, generation after generation, the pack standing strong, memory and hope, braided through the heart of Winterfell. Even as the world outside grew stranger and the magic of the old days faded into rumor and myth, the spirit of Arya Stark endured. She was there in the first howl of every pup, the bravery of every child who reached for more, the wisdom of every council that chose mercy and justice together. The North remembers, the pack survives, and the wild girl who became Lady of Winterfell ran forever through the blood and dreams of her people. An unbroken line of courage, love, and belonging as enduring as the heart tree's ancient roots. Kai. By the time Benjen Stark came into his own, Winterfell was at its greatest breadth. The curtain walls newly doubled, the godswood stretching wider than it had in living memory, and the Hall of Learning serving not only the North, but pilgrims from every corner of Westeros and beyond. The seasons turned with a regularity that almost seemed to promise an end to hardship. Yet Benjen, quiet and contemplative as the snow, knew that peace was never more than a choice away from peril. He wore needle at his hip, but wielded words as deftly as steel. For he had learned from Hara, from Celis, and from the endless annals of the council. Power meant responsibility, and to lead was to listen. The council's chambers hummed with the voices of Winterfell. Some mornings, Benjen found himself beside wildling elders who recited tales of giants and lost valleys. Others, he debated trade routes with Braavosi merchants or welcomed distant cousins from the mountains. Every debate, every decision, circled the core of Arya's legacy. None are turned away. All who would stand with the pack are kin. It made the North strong, but it was not without tension. When a caravan of southern refugees, their clothes ragged, their faces thin and haunted, arrived in the final storms of spring, Benjen ordered the gates flung open and food brought out before a single request was uttered. Some of his bannermen grumbled, for grain was dear after a late frost and war rumors echoed from the south. But Benjen stood firm, summoning the council and repeating words that had passed from Arya's lips to Mara's, from Celis's to Hara's. The pack survives together or not at all. The refugees brought stories of the latest southern war, a rebellion of petty lords against an aging queen, villages torched, harvests ruined, children orphaned by ambition and greed. Benjen listened and asked careful questions, then sent envoys with wagons of food and letters bearing the direwolf seal. You are not alone. The gesture cost Winterfell a season's comfort, but bought a loyalty that would save the North in winters yet to come. Benjen's sibling stood with him. His sister Maya, tall and silver-haired, rode north to keep peace with the free folk, settling old feuds with laughter and her deft bow. Their brother Harrion, bookish but sharp, managed the ledgers and wrote missives that were quoted in courts as far away as Sunspear. Their youngest, Willow, named in honor of Arya's kitchen ally of old, trained the next generation of healers, blending southern herb lore with wildling traditions, her garden a marvel of scent and color even under snow. Each of the Stark children brought home friends and lovers from far-off lands. Winterfell became a mosaic of voices and skin and story, and Benjen welcomed them all. When he took a spouse, it was a woman from Skagos, fierce and laughing, who rode into the keep astride a great shaggy pony and challenged him to a race before the Heart Tree. Their wedding, wild and raucous, brought all the North together. Wildlings and townsfolk, maesters and warriors, children dancing until the stars gave way to dawn. That same year, an envoy arrived from the citadel. The archmaesters, wary of the Hall of Learning's influence, sought to lure away its best students, promising gold and southern favor. Benjen received them with courtesy but held his ground. "The hall is open to all, and our knowledge is not for sale," he said. "If you wish to learn, stay. If you wish to bargain, look elsewhere." The maesters left in frustration, but not before two among them, one young, one old, chose to remain in Winterfell, content to teach and learn among those who valued wisdom above pride. News from the wider world was seldom entirely good. Across the narrow sea, the old free cities faded and fractured, giving rise to merchant princes and new kinds of war. In the Stormlands, pirates harried the coast, and more than once, desperate lords attempted to send spies north, seeking the secret of Winterfell's endurance. These spies, when discovered, were treated not as enemies, but as guests, set to work in kitchens or fields, until they understood that the North survived, not by secrets, but by the strength of its bonds. In Benjen's third year as leader, a drought struck the Riverlands. Once again, the hungry and dispossessed drifted north. The council met by firelight, a storm raging outside, to debate the limits of hospitality. Some fretted that Winterfell would starve if it took in more mouths. Benjen stood, needle gleaming at his side, and let the room fall silent. "My mother Hara taught that compassion is the North's strength. My ancestor Arya gave her home to the lost. If we hoard what we have, we may endure a little longer, but we become no better than those southern lords who send children into the cold. Share what we have, and in the sharing, we will find allies, new kin, and, above all, a reason to hope." "Then," the council agreed, and for 3 lean years, Winterfell stretched and strained, but never broke. In that time, new skills blossomed. A Riverlands boy brought the secret of winter wheat. A Lyseni girl taught a new way of binding wounds. A Dornish merchant built glass houses so that fruit could ripen even under snow. And when the drought ended, the North stood more diverse and skilled than ever. It was not all hardship. The Golden Peace was more than legend. There were harvest feasts, tourneys, contests of song and poetry, and long, lazy summers when children, descended from every corner of the known world, climbed the ramparts and played wolf and wildling in the shadow of the old gods. Lovers walked the godswood in every season, leaving offerings for luck, or simply pausing to listen to the wind in the leaves, the deep, slow pulse of sap and memory. Benjen became known as the Quiet Wolf, a ruler who rarely raised his voice but never lost a friend or forgot a kindness. He commissioned the carving of Arya's likeness above the Hall of Learning's doors, wild-haired, smiling, needle in hand, her gaze ever on the horizon. At her feet, carved in the ancient tongue, were the words she'd lived and died by. "The pack survives." On his 40th name day, Benjen led a midnight procession into the godswood. There, beside the Heart Tree, he named his daughter Ygritte, fiery, stubborn, clever, as his heir, giving her needle as her mother looked on with pride. In that moment, the council knelt not to a single leader, but to the unity that had outlasted war, famine, ambition, and even time. As Benjen grew older, he spent more hours in the Hall of Learning, teaching children the history of Winterfell, reading old letters from Arya, Salais, Hara, and all the line of Starks. He told them stories of battles won by mercy, not violence, of how a single girl's choice to stay and lead had shaped a new world. He showed them the tapestry that now hung in the hall, a great wolf surrounded by 100 smaller ones, each with eyes of a different color, each howling at the rising moon. He watched as Ygritte, bold and unafraid, carried forward the council's will, negotiating trade with the distant isles, forging alliances with southern cities, and when need arose, riding to defend the smallest hamlet or the poorest farm. He saw her siblings and cousins, each unique, each loved, spread the wisdom of the North to every corner of the land. On his last day, Benjen returned to the Godswood at dawn, the snow falling thick and silent. The great heart tree waited, its face as calm as ever. He knelt in the hush, feeling the presence of every Stark who had come before and every voice that would come after. "The pack survives," he whispered, and felt the truth of it settle deep into the roots, into the stone, into the living heart of Winterfell. He died that night with his family at his side, the banners of 100 kin fluttering in the starlit yard, the fire burning bright in every hearth. Winterfell endured. The Hall of Learning grew, and the story of Arya Stark, the wild girl who became Lady, who chose her family and her home, remained a touchstone of the North, as eternal and unbreakable as the old god's watchful gaze. As long as wolves ran through the woods and laughter rang through the halls, as long as a lost child could find shelter and a stranger could become kin, the North remembered. And always, when the first snows fell and the moon shone silver on the heart tree, a girl's laughter seemed to echo through the branches, wild and joyous, forever running through the dreams and lives of those she had loved and saved. The pack survives. The North remembers. And Winterfell, beneath the stars and the old gods, endures.